Verbs, the muscle of our language, the motor of our sentence. Life would be easy if verbs were easy. Yeah, that's true, easy but dull. Our Latin verb comes in many different flavors and colors, and what I really mean is tenses and moods. But it's precisely this varied nature of the verb that gives us great flexibility and amazing style. And it's because of the verb that Ovid is as great a poet as he is, and that Shakespeare is, well, Shakespeare. We're not going to learn about how to create all these different forms of the Latin verb. That's a much bigger task than just this video. But we will learn about the main parts of the verb. That's right, the principal parts. Let's give a verb. Okay, here we go. Amat, loves. Except wait, we don't list our verbs like this. Hold on, that's it, amo. This is the I form of the verb. Amo means I love, and it's often the word that is used to refer to Latin verbs. So if we're going to talk about the verb love in Latin, it's the word amo. But that's not the full word. If we just, okay, that looks just about right, and done. So the Latin verb has, let's count them, 4 parts to it. I know what you're going to say, no way. That's not fair in the least. English doesn't do that. Well, actually it does, but more on that in a moment. These 4 parts are called the verb's principal parts. They are principal because we can create all forms of the verb from these 4 words. They're like the stem cells of the verb. First, let's look at what these 4 parts of the verb actually are. The first part we've already talked about. Amo is the I form of the present tense. It's the first person singular, present active indicative, if you want the whole mouthful. Since O is the usual ending for verbs in the present tense with I as the subject, your first principal part almost always ends in an O. The second form is the infinitive. This is the to form of the verb, to love, as in, I am able to love Latin. Notice that this form of the word ends in an RE. Most infinitives in Latin will end in an RE. The third form is the I form in the perfect tense. The perfect tense is a kind of past tense. We translate this form as I loved or I have loved. Notice how this word ends in an I. Most third principal parts will end in a long I. The last form is either the accusative supine or the perfect passive participle in the neuter gender. In our principal parts, it's going to end in a UM and often in a TUM or SUM. So here you go. Many verbs have 4 principal parts, and it's important to learn them for each and every verb. Why? Because if you know just these 4 parts, you'll be able to put your verb into all the tenses and everything else. They really are that important. And let's look at an extreme case. The verb to carry in Latin is ferro, ferre, tuli, latum. Yeah, that's right. The last 2 principal parts don't look like they belong. And if you've ever run across the word tuli in your Latin sentence, you probably have because it's a pretty common word. You went running to the dictionary and look under the T for the meaning. But there won't be anything there because this verb actually starts with an F. So the question is, do the different types of verbs have any sort of patterns to them? Latin has 4 main groups of verbs called conjugations. We sort the verbs based on the ending of the second principal part. Verbs in the first conjugation end in a long ARE, like amo, amara, amawi, amatum. And if you look at the principal parts for many of these verbs, they will end in an O, ARE, AVI, ATUM. Second conjugation verbs end in a long ERE, like deleo, delere, delewi, deletum. Notice how the E is present in all principal parts of this verb. Often, though, second conjugation verbs will look like moneo, monere, monui, monetum, where the E is present in the first 2 parts, but not the last 2. Third conjugation verbs end in a short ERE, like tego, tegere, takesi, taktum. Notice how this verb ends with an O and then a short ERE. Also, the third principal part ends in a I, but the letter before it seems to have changed from a G to an X. In fact, many third conjugation verbs form their third principal part, the perfect tense, with an S then an I. But when you put the S after a G, you get tegsi, which is written more easily as takesi. In a similar manner, the G becomes a C before the tum in taktum. You see this sort of thing happening with many verbs in the third conjugation, like rego, regere, rexi, rectum, and duco, ducere, duxi, ductum. Fourth conjugation verbs end in a long IRE, like audio, audire, audivi, auditum. Here, the first principal part always ends in an IO, and we have the return of the V for the third principal part. While there are regularities among different verbs in Latin, there are many verbs out there that break these patterns. It's good to know the pattern because it will help you when you come across regular verbs, but it's also important to just sit down and learn a verb's principal parts. Hopefully, it will be just a little easier if you know what you're looking for. So, back to English. You may think that our language doesn't have principal parts because you've grown up speaking it, but many non-native English speakers learn long lists of words like swim, swam, swum, or eat, ate, eaten. These are the same principal parts: the present tense, the past tense, and the past participle. You see, Latin isn't much different from English. It's just that we are approaching Latin in a way that's different from how we learned English. But other people are doing the exact same thing with our own language as we are doing with Latin. And it's good to know that our struggles and pains aren't much different, and that we can learn much more about our own language by studying something so completely, useless like Latin.